I swung open the massive sliding door of my grain warehouse and froze, staring into a scene so absurd, so downright infuriating. I had to blink twice to make sure it wasn't some twisted hallucination. My grain warehouse, my lifeline during harvest, was packed wall to wall with sparkling luxury SUVs. Mercedes, BMWs, Range Rovers, even a couple of those overbuilt monstrosities they called G-Wagons. All lined up as if a high-end dealership lot had decided to sprout overnight on my farm. I could still smell faint traces of motor oil and overpriced air fresheners, wafting through the dry grain dust. I staggered back, mouth open, half expecting someone to jump out and yell, "Surprise!" But no one did. Only the sun, glaring off polished windshields, answered me. And then, the cherry on top. Hanging from the steel rafters, a cheap vinyl banner that read, "Silverwood HOA Spring Gala Overflow Parking. Authorized only." My barn had been turned into a parking garage for soccer moms and golf dads without so much as a knock on my door. Now, I'm not the kind of man who loses his temper easily, but I felt the heat rise from my boots to my hat. I stormed toward the farmhouse to find out who in God's name thought they had the right. Didn't have to wait long. Strutting up the driveway came Deborah Langford, president of the Silverwood Homeowners Association, flanked by two clipboard-carrying assistants. She wore that smug little smile of someone who knew they'd already trespassed and didn't care. Deborah barely glanced at me before returning to her phone, like I was just a speed bump on her suburban expressway. I asked as calmly as I could why the HOA's entire fleet of soccer wagons was now decorating my warehouse. Without missing a beat, she said, "Oh, don't be dramatic. It's just for the weekend. We needed extra parking for the spring gala, and your barn is conveniently located." Like she was doing me a favor. I told her this wasn't happening. I needed the warehouse for actual farming. She chuckled and tapped her clipboard. The HOA and Community Enhancement Committee already cleared it. Cleared it? I hadn't signed anything. My name was on the so-called paperwork, but my signature wasn't. That's when it hit me. This wasn't ignorance. It was theft. Calculated, arrogant theft. Later that evening, after a hard lemonade and a long walk through the fields, I paid a visit to the HOA headquarters. They'd taken over the old post office and turned it into some kind of corporate lair. Fancy water coolers, branded pins, the works. I played dumb, said I just wanted to understand the paperwork. That's when Rob, the HOA vice president, handed me a coffee and whispered, "You didn't hear it from me, but she's been planning this for months. She wants the barn permanently." My heart thudded. This wasn't a one-time stunt. This was a hostile takeover. They wanted my warehouse, my family's legacy, to become their permanent parking lot. I thanked Rob with a nod and left, staring out over the moonlit fields. My father always said, "Never let someone steal from you while you're standing there watching." And right then, I knew exactly what I had to do. The next morning, I called an old friend, Sheriff Mason Kincaid. Retired Marine, fourth-generation rancher, and the only man who knew the county ordinances better than the folks who wrote them. When I told him the story, he let out a whistle. Then he said the words that sparked a plan. "You know there's a law about trespassing vehicles on AG land. Document them, give it 48 hours, and you can tow every one of those shiny rigs straight to impound." I grinned, so wide the phone nearly slipped from my hand. By sunrise, I was documenting everything. Photos, videos, license plates, timestamps. Karen's minions cheerfully directing cars like it was a carnival. I even filmed Deborah bragging about how generous I was for lending the space. Later that day, I met Mason in his office. He pulled out the county ordinance book and showed me the clause about abandoned vehicles interfering with agricultural operations. Plain as day. Enforceable. And better yet, there was a line about expedited removal if harvest was impacted. "You could do it clean and legal, son," Mason said. "Just don't tell me if you decide to make it entertaining." That night, I watched the HOA's gala tents glow from across my pasture. Laughter, music, wine. They had no idea the clock was ticking. 48 hours. I called in Big Hank's Towing and Louisa from Twin Forks Recovery. Hank used to wrestle bulls. Louisa could pull a truck out of a sinkhole blindfolded. They were all in. The next HOA meeting, I showed up hat in hand. Deborah greeted me with mock surprise. "Well, if it isn't Farmer Clay, come and donate your barn permanently." I smiled and told her I decided not to make a fuss. She leaned into the podium and whispered, "I knew you'd come around. It's for the community, after all." Rob cornered me by the punch bowl. "Be careful," he said. "She's got county board connections. They don't care about signatures, just who's cutting checks." "I've got friends too," I told him. The next day, they threw an even bigger event. More cars, red carpet, spotlights. They turned my barn into a full-blown gala venue. As Deborah gave a speech about unity, Sheriff Mason scribbled notes nearby. When the 48 hours were up, we moved. Tow trucks rolled in like cavalry, engines rumbling, chains clinking. Mason handed Deborah a folded notice. "This is a joke, right?" she scoffed. "No, ma'am," Mason said. "Your time's up. Your documents are forged, and these vehicles are now considered abandoned." Deborah laughed, tried to block the trucks. But the ordinance didn't care about balloons and banners. The first SUV went up on the flatbed. Deborah screamed. Another followed. Then another. A crowd gathered. Some folks brought lawn chairs. Deborah tried to drive off in a Range Rover. Mason stepped in her way. "Wouldn't do that if I were you." Her meltdown was spectacular. She screamed, bargained, blamed her husband, accused the HOA board of betrayal. Rosie, the tow driver, even hooked up Deborah's golf cart. "It's on the list," she said with a grin. Local news showed up, catching it all on camera. A reporter asked Deborah if she had anything to say. "This is an attack on the community," she cried. The crowd burst into laughter. Mason dropped the final hammer. "State inspectors are on their way. Misuse of HOA funds. Might want to call a lawyer." The crowd gasped. Deborah stumbled back. Her board scattered. Every SUV was towed. Every last one. My barn stood empty once more. The next morning, the auction began. The county impound lot shimmered with rows of luxury SUVs. People came from all over. Some to buy, some just to watch Deborah squirm. Deborah sat behind a folding table, scribbling frantically, flanked by embarrassed board members. Her husband sat beside her, face pale. The auctioneer, a wiry man named Clyde, kicked it off. First on the block, Deborah's cherry red Range Rover. "Do I hear 5,000? Her husband raised his paddle. "6," came a shout. Martha Lattimore, orchard owner, wasn't backing down. She won, gave Deborah a little wave as she took the keys. The cars sold fast. Some at a steal. Every sale felt like justice. Rosie put up the golf cart early. Billy, my farmhand, snagged it for $100. Drove it around the lot, honking. Then came Mason's announcement. The state attorney found evidence of HOA fund misappropriation. Leadership vote will be held after the auction. The crowd roared. Deborah's mouth hung open. Rob, pale and sweating, stepped away from her. The auction ended with enough money to fix the warehouse, buy new equipment, and donate to the local firehouse and school AG program. Deborah was ousted. Rob resigned. The HOA crumbled. A week later, I stood with Mason and Billy as the first load of fresh grain rolled into the barn. For the first time in weeks, it looked like a farm again. "You ever think of making this place an auction house?" Billy joked. "Or a parking lot?" Mason added. I shook my head. "Nope. This here's a farm. Always has been. Always will be." Justice was served. And nobody was ever parking on my land without asking again.